Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome, dear friends, to Kardec Radio, and this is Health and Spirituality. That's how we began Kardec Radio 9 years ago. 9 years ago, a little more than that, as we began on July 4th. And you're welcome to join us today because we have a special guest. He's been here with us before when we were only audio. Now we're bringing everyone back. Yes, since last interview with the author of Cure, Dr. Jeffrey Radiger, 2 weeks ago, we have restarted the series. Many people have been asking, and we're finally able to bring it back to Saturdays at 11 a.m. And here we are. We're going to talk about health and spirituality because that's what we're looking for, especially during the pandemic. The pandemic is a... Complete the sentence. What do you think it is? What do you feel it is? What is actually the pandemic for us? There's much more than the eyes can see. Actually, we can see the virus, and that's why many people don't use masks, right? But we here at Kardec Radio, we listen to science, and as Kardec says, we go along with science, and the CDC in the United States has revealed recently that using masks not only prevents the sick people from contaminating others, but also from being contaminated. So using masks is good for you. It's important for you, but mostly important for those who are more vulnerable, okay? We can't forget that maybe we are not that vulnerable, but others are. We need to be conscientious, disciplined, maybe just for a little more, if we just behave. That's our invitation here at Kardec Radio, and you're welcome to join us in this program. Of course, it's live, so you can ask questions. And if you're watching this on demand or listening to it on demand, you can also ask your questions, sending a message to kardecradio@gmail.com, and we'll be able to reply to you. All right? You can send suggestions, you can recommendations, you can ask questions about things that are important for you, thinking that we can reach out to you, and we will refer to others if needed. Today, we're going to talk about mostly, not only, but mostly about this book, A Journey of the Soul, Explaining Disability on Earth. It's a channeled book, much like André Luiz books that were channeled by the Brazilian medium, Chico Xavier. Interesting, the story, the most important part of the story is also on how this book comes to life. Ricardo Petrillo, the spirit author, he comes through his father, through a mediumistic meeting where his parents gather together in prayer, in study, concentration, and this has been the 9th book that has come through the mediumship of the parents, especially the father. Claudio Petrillo and Silvia Knoploch. Who are they? We want to know more. It's a beautiful, true account. And it's something to bring mediumship to reality because there's so much myth nowadays. People think that we can only be mediums in particular ways and this way, that way. There is a framework. But is it restricted to certain conditions we've been thinking about? We need to know more about mediumship, right? Not only that, but the story behind this book. Nowadays, we're facing a public health crisis. We know many cases of coronavirus that have so many repercussions in the lives of those who got sick, sometimes long-term consequences, creating some forms of disability sometimes. We need to understand what is this all about as well. Maybe some part of this book can help us clarify the needs of today. We're going to welcome our dear friend and also the father of Ricardo Petrillo, Dr. Claudio Petrillo. He's here with us. Thank you, Claudio, for being here with us at Cardiac Radio once again. How are you?
I really thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to speak with you and perhaps help in clarifying certain things about the book and the current situation, as well as the processes.
You know, Claudio, we want to share with our friends that we also dream of bringing you and Silvia at another program to talk about so much more, because you guys have so much to share with us, your expertise in medicine. Let me read a little bit about this for the viewers. Claudio Petrillo is a board-certified physician in physical medicine and rehabilitation. He completed his residency training in PMNR and a fellowship in spinal cord injuries at New York University, Langone Medical Center, Rusk Institute of Rehabilitation Medicine, and served as clinical professor at NYU until 1982. He was the chairman of the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Norwalk Hospital in Norwalk, Connecticut, from 1982 to 2012. And he was recognized by his peers through the Castle Connolly Medical Service as one of the top doctors in the New York metro area for 10 consecutive years. And this is just a tiny bit of his resume, but there's so much more because he's a spiritist. And Claudio, I want to share with other people. You were the first interpreter for Divilo Franco when he started coming to the U.S., right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's an experience I won't forget. It was in New York at the hotel called Doral Inn, which probably doesn't exist anymore. And it had been sponsored by the Spiritist Educational Society at the time, which was a tiny bit of a seed to introduce Spiritism into the U.S.
Wow. And I remember also there are so many things you've been advocating for this bridge between medicine and spirituality, and this new way of seeing medicine as well, right? We would love to do a program with you about this because it's a new frontier in medicine to bridge the traditional medicine into this new field of spirituality or a more holistic way of being, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think medicine and the spirituality are completely intertwined. There's not a separation. It shouldn't be, period. And we've, in the last couple of decades, both Silvia and I, which we've been partners for many decades too, at home and in practice, we have really used spirituality as a primary tool to address our patients' problems.
Wow. That makes a difference. And I remember talking recently with Dr. Jeffrey Rediger in his book, Cured, the importance of he talks about a revolution that is needed in medicine nowadays. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes. Well, it is unfortunate that the increase into the new advance in medicine has distanced the doctors from the patient themselves. You walk into a hospital nursing unit nowadays, you rarely see a doctor or a nurse bedside with a patient. You see them sitting at a computer or standing at a computer. Actually, the most relevant people in the contact are the aides, and they are grossly unprepared to doing that job. And now it's particularly terrifying because patients in the hospital can't even have, in many states, their relatives or their loved ones next to them. We've gone through a period of solitude in nursing homes, in hospital units, and that sometimes in critical times where your loved one must be next to you. So it is lacking that spirituality, the link from the body of the spirit, which illnesses and disease bring to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
The most important time in which somebody can become sensitive to spirituality is when your body is suffering and you feel vulnerable and you don't know why. And if you're a victim or if this is part of it, and so you are susceptible, you are receptive of news. I'm not talking about speeches or education. Basically, touching with a with some optimism or what it is to come or not.
Mm-hmm. And nowadays we're experiencing this pandemic that is just getting worse. Instead of getting better, it seems like there is a new wave coming along. It's even hard to define. And how do you see it in that perspective, in terms of this bridge between medicine and spirituality and what's going on around?
It's there are different aspects. One is that the way I viewed it as a physician to begin with, which was very odd because we knew very little about the virus and what to happen. It hit us all in the medical field as well, with a lot of unknown. And unfortunately, the media nowadays is thirsty for headlines. And that didn't allow science to progress the normal way in which is slow, patience. And so the information was scattered via the internet and so on, creating a lot of uneasiness. Some, of course, correct, because it is a terrible virus. It's a pandemic that can be compared to the previous terrible pandemics we went through Earth. And second is that we changed the way we practice. I've been practicing now for 10 years, all in the office with Silvia, and we deal a lot with pain. And I've never seen a flurry of pain and suffering as now. It's emotional, it is spiritual, and it's hopelessness. This is bringing physical pain. And, most people want it resolved either with a pill or with an injection or with something that might alleviate. So we are taking that opportunity to insert the component of sensitize the individual to something that is beyond their physical pain. And that's very successful. Unfortunately, the day-to-day practicing doesn't allow the physicians to do more on that. The third aspect is that Ricardo started to write about it, and I'm beginning to have an idea of how the spirituality sees the pandemic, which is rather different than what we see here in the headlines.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. As you're talking about Ricardo, we want to share with everyone who Ricardo is. Ricardo is your son, if I may say this way, because they say, once you depart, but he is your son, right? And he was born in 1985. And at the time of his passing, 2005, he was a sophomore at the University of Connecticut. And soon after, you and Silvia, in your very disciplined way of practicing spirituality, you start feeling the presence of Ricardo and bringing information since the first book. It's been 9 books this far. And we want to ask you, Claudio, what is the reason why you've decided, you and Silvia, to publish these books mainly? What is the main reason why?
First, because we were told, I think, first and foremost, before writing the books, we were in contact with Ricardo through messages and dozens, if not hundreds, and then maybe a year or two after we started receiving his messages, he announced that there would be the first book. And it was to be published. He said there's no need to create any advertise or anything. Just publish and see what happens. Things will. That's not your job to care about doing the rest. Your job is to write it and publish. Silvia does the editing. How did we get to receive his messages? Well, we've been spiritists for a long time. Mm-hmm. But after his discarnation, it was probably what kept us sane, and togetherness was our key. We had 2 more children. We started then holding frequent meetings at home with our family, including some cousins that we have in the area, and then, in our Silvia and I prayers and sessions and so on, I started receiving some messages from him, very rudimentary, like a stuttering and interesting process, and it evolved over the last almost 15 years. It has evolved to a conversation now. Well, it's not a conversation. I don't have anything to say. It's a monologue, actually, but I understand.
So how does it happen? He speaks and you write. It's like automatic writing. It's more like psychography, or it's like dictation. How is it?
What we do, we do our regular meetings. We meet several times a week. One of the meetings is for a general group. There are some other mentors that speak, some people that have been part of the group. And the other meetings is just we read a series of books, spiritual books. And then I sit down and we pray and I just start writing. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it is. I think we're doing that 2 to 3 times a week now, besides the weekly meeting that's for different purposes.
I see. And then in this case, you and Silvia, and just for those who are asking about where to find all the books, you can go either to Amazon or go straight to the website www.eternalbondsoflove.com. What's interesting is that this latest book, and I've read, for example, a comment, an article in which John Zerial, who is a spiritist in the United States, through his mailing list at the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society, Educational Society, he makes a beautiful comparison between the way Ricardo writes and the way André Luiz wrote through Chico Xavier. We found it so interesting. I had people from other locations forwarding this email to me and saying, Vanessa, have you seen it? And I said, yes, I have the book. We will interview the parents soon. We will. And people were really pushing us because they said, where can I get the book? And we're referring to Amazon.
Amazon is probably the way. This article from João is very humbling. I've known João for decades, and as I told him, the only thing that I appreciate is the fact that he's always been honest. He's never been uh, throwing flowers or trying to sugar things up. So what I was interested is in the aspect that he says that the obviously don't even think about Chico Xavier comparing. That's not the point. The point is that in many instances, when you read Chico Xavier and you have those travelings via horse carriages and so on, and now it doesn't speak to the American public as well. We are Brazilians in a way, so we understand who Chico is and the time of. But it is an interesting comparison. I never thought of it at all. That it is a more modern way of addressing some issues of spirituality using common knowledge of nowadays. Um, I believe an American at Virginia's age who never heard of carriages carrying horses. It's whatever.
But in cartoons.
Yeah, I know, but the fact that we are talking and we are talking to many friends out there in this way nowadays, it's taken for granted. But it's very great difference. Yeah, I think that article was humbling. I wrote Jerome back, and he's done a good job, good work with the Educational Society.
Yeah. He did beautiful work, and I'm glad to see he's coming back. He's coming back into the movement itself. Talking about, right, we hope, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yes. So it's interesting. Ricardo begins this book talking about the many questions, and more questions. And I think in society, especially nowadays with the pandemic and everything that is happening around the world, people have so many questions. I think I've never heard so many questions coming from people. Everything's like almost like up in the air. And that's so interesting that this book begins with Ricardo when exactly 4 years ago, November 2016, he was reporting that he had so many questions, and that he says, I feel at times I'll never know all the answers. It's so beautiful the way he writes, because it brings us to the reality of all of us. So when I feel Ricardo is writing, he's writing, and we can understand the way he sees and feels it, because it's pretty much how it is. And he ends that very introduction by saying, I would say I'm anxious to begin our work, although the correct term is excited, since there's no anxiety in my heart. So beautiful. And as a psychologist as well, I think it's beautiful because he is naming his emotions and he's sharing them with us so transparently, if I may say, that he doesn't put a pose like, oh, I come as now a spirit guide for somebody. He comes as your son, and at the same time, somebody who is a student in the spiritual realm, learning, like an apprentice. Am I right? That's the feeling that I get when Ricardo is writing. Much like André Luiz, he is learning. André Luiz, since he was a physician and he crossed over, he had to humble down. But Ricardo didn't have that problem, right? Because he felt himself still as a student, and he kept himself in that position. Is that my impression?
Oh, absolutely. I think that one of the things in his messages he always refers to is that he listens to his mentors and guides. And in this book, he's guided in a way by Richard. And Richard is a more elevated spirit that is there to manage his experiences, emotional, because it is an emotional experience. If you're traveling to places all over the world and seeing so much suffering and situations, so the truth here is that uh, why do we have those so many questions now? Why didn't we have the same questions a year ago? And I think what it comes out is that the more connected to the material world, the less questions we have. Once that material world is wounded or affected, and you understand that your flesh is vulnerable, that that there's something that you cannot answer, or your scientists won't answer, or the government won't answer, or whatever it is, you have too many questions unanswered.
Mm-hmm.
What is the key for that is for you not to disconnect completely from the material world, but to take it in a proper level of importance. We are here for a particular reason, or several particular reasons, but our home is really not here. And that answers a lot of questions to begin with. And by the way, the other thing is that who are we to want answers to everything? I mean, imagine the levels of evolution of the spirit and how many more things are out there. So what we know is so little compared to what it is out there in the universe and so on. It's humbling. So yeah, we always going to have questions and questions and questions. But I think what you said is important. He has his questions, but they don't bring him anxiety. He's taking those in peace of heart, which is basically what's not happening now in Earth. There is a lot of emotions, as I said before. Everybody's in pain. I mean, our office could have been 24/7 seeing people with pain.
Wow. I agree with you. I agree with you. And it's amazing because Ricardo begins the book talking about reminiscences, and then, and he even talks about you guys as parents. And he says, my parents are both doctors and work together in the same practice, caring for people with all types of physical disabilities and handicaps. So here comes to the central theme of this book about explaining disability on Earth. I think this book is fascinating because he sees you two, the parents, working with people, helping them manage their pain levels, overcome their disabilities, go through their rehabilitation. And he comes now almost like as a reach out movement saying, let me share what I've come to know regarding why certain things may happen, because then we may find new ways of managing it. And then he goes straight, and that was a very surprise to me when I saw this chapter titled Perispirit, right at the beginning of the book. We're barely on page 13. And then we have this chapter about perispirit, which for us as spiritists is the explanation of so many things because it's the molding for the physical body. Many people go to the pharmacies, buy remedies like Band-Aid, and we don't go to the core. I see cancer patients. They go through chemotherapy and they don't try anything else, thinking that chemotherapy is going to simply do the deal. And I've heard of cancer patients who went through the whole journey of embracing a true transformation and really getting healed, sometimes even without chemotherapy, as we've discussed in a previous program with Dr. Rediger. So in this case, when he brings at the very beginning of this book, not the idea, the concept of our spiritual body, you as a doctor, you're seeing your very son, somebody who is proposing a shift in the paradigm in which we see the patients and deal with diseases, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I thought the many reasons that he brought this concept is because most American brothers and sisters that are interested don't have the concept of perispirit as well. So it got to be a way to familiarize them with that idea, because it's critical to the entire book, and what the individuals that he interviews in the book and he sees and they examine are going through, and how their form, shape, and everything can change according to the perispirit in a way, and this even in the spiritual realm. So I thought it was a very important chapter for him to have.
And let us talk a lot about, would you like to highlight a case that he described in which we would have some form of clarification about this way, the spiritual way of seeing disabilities?
Yeah, there are many cases. The interesting thing about the book is that it was not meant to compare or to attach their disability while in flesh to what they did in the past, because that would bring a lot of guilt and things like that, although there are cases that are mentioned there. Also, it would create a lot of ideas of punishment, and that's not the idea of spiritism, of the spirituality. It's not punishing. It is rescuing death. So it's an opportunity for spiritual elevation. I think that what caught me off guard was the fact that I deal with those patients every day.
Mm-hmm.
And in about 45 years of practice, I do have some experience in dealing with them. And so I always question them, and I learn not to question how much of my influence was in the book. And I cannot tell, and it doesn't really matter to me. I'm not just writing as a robot. I can stop at any time. I can sense when there is something that is not a good message coming, and I will stop. So I do have control of that. It's a form of dictation, but I have full control. So, but it doesn't really matter how much of my experience there is. It is why would they choose, the spirituality would choose something like that? I think the use of the medium's expertise enhances the process and not makes it invalid. So one of the interesting cases, there are two patients in the first visit they make.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, I think it's page 28, is Greg.
Mm-hmm.
And Greg is I think he's into his 50s now.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born with cerebral palsy with severe disabilities, both intellectual as well as physical. He is completely wheelchair bound, dependent in all activities of daily living, self-care. He cannot propel his own wheelchair, and he cannot communicate via speech. He has very, very severe intellectual disabilities. So what he portrays in his report of you is that basically Greg is aware of what's happening to him because his spirit observe his body in this situation. But he, with his heart and his spirit, he is able to absorb all the love of the caretakers that are the nurses and therapists and so on that surround him. And that is healing to him. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that we used to have children born with cerebral palsy in the past, dying at an early age. Not anymore, because medicine has progressed. They live to be in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they spend 50. He spent 55 plus years with this, or locked into this body, and still, when he's seen in the spiritual world, he's happy. His physical deformities are no longer observed in his perispirit. And the caretaker that's with him is sending rays of love, but he's already immersed in the love of all those that stayed back, that treated him so well. So that was healing for him. He didn't do anything himself there, but he absorbed the goodness, the love, and that was a healing factor for him to go and move on the next stage. Whereas the next individual, Vicky, about the same age, I would guess, also severe physical, intellectual disabilities, unable to communicate. After discarnation, she remains angry. And she, instead of absorbing the rays of love that are sent to her from their caretakers, she absorbed the indifference of some of those that, in the medical field and so on, with many aides and nurses, some are excellent, and I would say most, but there are those that are not. And so she was capturing those negative vibrations, and still very frustrated for 5 decades or 6 decades observing her body in that condition. So she still maintained the form of her last incarnation, and the anger wouldn't relieve her from the who she was in the last incarnation. So those are two very, very likely individuals capturing a different message in terms of the spiritual evolution.
Yeah, here Ricardo mentions when he's describing Vicky's case, comparing to Greg's, that he describes something that we could name like the energy medicine approach, when he says Richard removed his hands from Vicky's forehead, passing her care to the nun that assisted her with so much love and affection. So, and as you're saying, and one more thing, I did not ask who she was, as I thought Richard would have revealed it if worthwhile or constructive to the case, but her whole being emitted rays of light and love that passed instantaneously to Vicky. So he's talking about this energy medicine that is being delivered to rebalance the perispirit. So now this is in the spiritual realm. When we are here in the physical realm, and this is just an extra question that comes to mind, because he mentions at the beginning of the book, you and Silvia, as the physicians who are caring for patients who are undergoing pain, disabilities, going through rehabilitation. How do you see this information as something that can be potentially incorporated in the treatment?
Well, as spiritists, we know that if we were able to provide energy therapy to them, it would facilitate the process of transition and would give them peace. I think what's happening is that, at least in my experience, the professionals that are really involved with these patients are so caring. They are angels. And they are the treatment, not the doctors. Doctors see them quickly and don't understand what's happening, and in many instances would prefer that they weren't alive, because they think their lives are useless and a burden to society. That's very commonly done. So sometimes when I recommend a particular procedure for a patient, a primary care doctor may well say, "What for?"
Mm-hmm.
I say to improve a little bit the quality of their lives. What quality? So there is a complete, a materialistic view of things, pretty much taking us back to Spartan's time, except that you can't really do what they did.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not much different. So I would think that for them, that's the reason. There's a reason for them to be that way. And I think the introduction of certain energy therapies to those centers would be fantastic. I think there's more of a wave towards that now. Nurses are beginning to advocate more for energy therapies. I think that will make a difference, at least from day to day. Facilitate channeling the love to their hearts and spirits so that they could be withholding their trial in more peace.
So Claudio, here Ricardo was mentioning, for example, Vicky's case, and talking about what he learned from her mental connection and fixation to certain scenarios that she lived in, etc., and how it impacted her whole health, spiritually speaking, peri-spiritually speaking. So here we're talking about how mind and bodies, the integration really work. And we see nowadays many people not only unaware of this, but totally never worked in integration of mind and bodies. We're talking about bodies because there's a spiritual body and a physical body. So what do you see in these cases? As Ricardo is showing to us, he's describing a scenario, how this emotional life is impacting this spiritual body, how this mental pattern, as Andre Luis mentions in a way, how it affects our health. If this is so, as we see in the Spiritist science, what else can we do here in terms of our medicine, way before we talk about energy medicine?
Well, nothing different than what Jesus said. I think what Vicky's going through is that each time she thinks about certain aspects of her past life or the previous one, she's still stuck with her emotions and not willing to forgive herself or anybody else. Now, if you translate that to our current incarnation, how many people are not forgiving to somebody else or to themselves for having done that and carry this anger, this revolt through their lives to their lives until that's manifested in some physical issue, such as pain or even a cancer or some other forms of illness. I think that's so simple that to go back and read the basic teachings of Jesus and there the key for everything is there.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about guilt. And as a neuroscientist of pain, I've researched so many studies in psychosomatics that talk about the relationship between guilt and pain. And when we go to Andre Luis' book, Evolution into Worlds, I never forget this chapter 19, part 2, when he says that our susceptibility to illnesses begin when we realize that we made a grave mistake. So there is a great association, as you're seeing in Vicky's case, and it's beyond the physical body. It's the true spiritual body, right? That's what Ricardo is telling us too.
Yeah, the realization that you did something wrong is actually a good thing. It's how you move on from that realization. I think there are different ways of doing it. You forgive yourself. You try to correct your conduct and move forward. You can't go back, but you can take that without leaving any scar. That's what we do. That's why we pray. I mean, we all make mistakes. We make plenty of mistakes. I mean, that's why we're here. And it's just realizing those mistakes and trying to correct and trying to follow some simple principles. And one thing that's hard for people, mainly in America, to do is to forgive themselves, sometimes more than forgiving somebody else.
Yes.
So you carry those stigmas in your heart for years, decades. I mean, this is so common. I'm not a psychoanalyst, but we all have to go through that with our patients that are in pain, and they have to connect with something. So, yeah, I think what Vicky's going is that she cannot let go.
Mm-mm.
And she, she's not, she may need to come back or with some other, whatever wisdom there will be in terms of her next incarnation.
So Claudio, you also mentioned before we entered the program that Ricardo keeps writing. There are two main questions here I want to ask. First of all, a highlight on how, as spiritists, you proceed. Because I remember visiting you in your home and how much you shared, and you were very disciplined. I have to say, you and Silvia are very disciplined in your lives. And the way you do the spiritist meetings at home and the mediumistic meetings have a whole process, like steps. Would you like to share a bit of it? Because some people, they think, and I've participated in some meetings that are not by spiritists, where people are eating peanuts and they say, let's stop eating peanuts, close our eyes and get into trance, just like that. And the peanuts are still sitting on the coffee table and the cups of tea, etc. And they just close their eyes and go into trance and start talking to spirits at random. That's not how you guys do it. Would you like to share a little bit?
Well, oh yes, we have a room, our library, we call it, which is kind of our sacred room. It's a spacious, nicely done, and we have a couple of chairs that we sit in front of a fireplace and a table next to it. And basically, all we do there is our spiritual activities. We don't. You visit that room when you are here, and that's where we hold our meetings. Now, every meeting has a time to start. I think Divilo visited our home once, and he helped us with some of the concepts, but we were pretty much into that as well. I mean, he says that the spirits are busy. You can't just sit down and, now I'm going to request your presence in here. They're not our slaves, and you're not going to come just because you want them. It's not a ritual. We don't have any rituals. We sit down and we start reading. We have usually 6 or 7 books. One of them is the Spirit's book, always. And we read a couple of pages of each book. We have a background music that's very soft and usually Baroque music or something, and very inducing. We use some things to enhance our senses. We have some fragrances that there to just add a little touch. It's not a ritual again, but it's something that it enriches our environment, I would say. So we do the reading. Whenever we do our meetings, we read the last message or the last chapter of the book. And then after that, I go and sit down and give it a little time and start writing. So, but basically that's it. We have time for the meetings, and If we need to change a meeting, we do it ahead of time. We set another time, which happens. We used to travel and we used to change the times and so on. But it's a kind of respect, like as I would do it with you. You know, if I have an 11 o'clock meeting and I can't attend, I don't expect you to attend to me 2 hours later without a notice. So
I know. And we have a question here by John DeRosa. Before I ask my question, I think he's talking about Vicky. I'm not so sure. He's asking, did her parents teach her to forgive herself? Did they discipline with love or anger?
I think Vicky was, if I'm not wrong, she was abandoned by her parents early. I believe that's the case. So I think there's some anger, might be some anger related to that as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think so. You know, understand when a child is born with such severe disabilities, parents are lost. They don't have any help educating them, mainly on the spiritual part. And most of them tend to just place the child in an institution.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, John DeRosa, for asking the question. And now, as we are marching towards the end, we don't want to finish, but we hope we can bring you back for more. When we talk about Ricardo's writings, there's always more. As he says, he has questions, he keeps bringing his reports. And thank God that you and Silvia keep sharing the reports through the publishing of the books. Now, you've mentioned to us before we started this interview that now he's writing about the spiritual view on the pandemic. Would you be able to share a little bit about it with our viewers?
Yes, I think so. I think it's a view of the pandemic because I am as affected as anybody else by the pandemic. I mean, and although I understand there is a cause for that, and I haven't really taken the time to try to understand. So I think the thing of the book is not to address the pandemics on the political, scientific way, but as a fact of life, and how is that translated in the spiritual world. And it's not with panic, that's for sure. They're not panicking out there. They're sending thousands or perhaps millions of spirits to help with each individual to process this situation the best we can. And that actually the pandemics must be seen as another chance, another challenge, another opportunity for spiritual growth. And within that, I think there are those that will be more successful than others. We've known, and I think you've known that. We've received a lot of communication on our weekly meetings of an increasing number of suicides in the young during the pandemic. There are those that will falter. There are those that will fall into drugs and drinking and other escapes. There are those that are angered and they start blaming whatever factors there are. There is a culture in this country of blaming something. Somebody here must be responsible for that. The Chinese or whatever. It's just that's not the case. There is a reason for that. We may not know the reason. What his message is that we as workers for an improved spirituality in the world have a great opportunity because people are more sensitized now. And I think one of the things, I'm not sure if he wrote that or I think he probably did,
Mm,
is that it's not through lecturing or trying to indoctrinate somebody,
mm,
but it's sensitizing and opening the curiosity to a different alternative that they haven't seen it yet. And that is the spiritual way of looking at everything.
mhm.
Just by that, sensitizing somebody uh, will offer a greater opening for them in the future, whether this life or next life,
Mhm.
to expand and to continue their ascension in the spiritual realm.
Yes, you're right. I was reading a report yesterday at a newspaper of a nurse who was caring for COVID-19 patients. He got contaminated and he was hospitalized. And a few hours before passing away, he actually talked to the family saying, I'll be back. And he never did. So we're sharing this because we don't have control over it. And just behind here, we have the picture of Professor Eurípides Barçanufo, who was a great healer, a wonderful medium. In Chico Xavier's own words, he was the complete medium, spiritist medium that existed in Brazil. And he, caring for patients who had the Spanish flu, he got contaminated himself and he discarnated at 38 years of age. So as you're saying, Claudio, um, we are all affected. We're all somewhat vulnerable, susceptible to it. And the least we can do is to cleanse the heart, right? As Ricardo is saying, the book here, it's clear to me. If I could get a message from this book, A Journey of the Soul, today for the pandemic, this book, though it doesn't talk about the pandemic yet, I would say is elevate your thoughts and your feelings, connect higher, cleanse the heart. Would you agree that that's one of the main messages of this book?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there isn't much of a difference in what when you're dealing with a chronic disability or with an acute pandemic. You've got to respond to that. That's your challenge. The only thing is that unfortunately, Barçanufo didn't have the means of preventing his own death at the time. We do have now. We
Mm-hmm.
do have masks and we have protective equipment, and we have social distancing that we as doctors and everybody else must do. That's an obligation. That's part of our social, individual, spiritual responsibility, and that's the first step. And then the rest is up to us to choose how much you will involve in helping others. But that's primary. That's mandatory.
Mandatory. So now we know we have to wrap up the program. What would you like to share as your final comment to the viewers and listeners at Kardec Radio regarding the topic of the pandemic or the books? A main message to all of them, please, Claudio.
I think it's what I just said. I think we all have a primary responsibility with ourselves and with others. And it's very simple. It's just wearing a mask, keeping social distancing, pray, and whenever we have an opportunity to sensitize somebody that is angry, revolted, or suffering for that, we could help them by sensitizing them, not by making speech. Indoctrination is usually not welcomed, and it may be confused as another religion to be sent. No, sensitizing them to their own souls and spirituality.
So thank you so much, Claudio, for being here with
Thank
us.
you, Vanessa.
We missed Silvia. We want to bring you guys back for more because you have so much to share with us, and we hope we have more opportunities with you and Silvia as well, and Ricardo, of course, at Kardec Radio. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Bye.
Right, dear friends. So here we are. You see, this book, A Journey of the Soul, Explaining Disability on Earth. Of course, we're not going to spoil the whole book. We just mentioned a few cases here. Dr. Petrillo was able to share just one or two cases, and it's fascinating. The uplifting view, it's ridding ourselves of these feelings of guilt, of these feelings of remorse, of these feelings that are negative. Right, friends? Thank you so much. We thank the friends that are writing here as well. Darnell Fly, thank you so much. Thank you for your comment. Thank you, Luni Coliello. Thank you, Kara Correa. Thank you, John DeRose, and many more. So, friends, we hope that you feel more inspired because we need it. Nowadays, more than ever, we need to be the ones who bring some more light into the world. Let's not be affected and contaminated by others' doubts and fears. Let us be the ones who are the light workers. Shall we, friends? We wish you lots of blessings during this day and stay tuned at Cardiac Radio because here we have always more to nourish our souls. Thank you, friends.